Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Lee Harris, and he's here today to share with us his new book, Energy Speaks: Messages from Spirit on Living, Loving, and Awakening. Now, Lee is an intuitive medium, transformational leader, musician, and visual artist. In 2004, he began holding channeling sessions and readings in his home, and today he leads workshops throughout the world. He's a native of England and is now based in California. So let's welcome to the show, Lee Harris.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here, and so excited to be diving into your new book with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a labor of love for sure.
Well, for our listeners that are new to you, why don't you share a little bit about your story? Because I understand that you channel and you're an intuitive messenger, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I was 23 years old, I heard the voice of my guides, and that was almost 20 years ago now. And it was funny. It was something I wasn't expecting, but perhaps more importantly, didn't think would happen to me. I definitely had it in my head at the time that only special people heard, the voice of their guides or could do those kinds of things. And so one of my beliefs and messages is, if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And I'm sure many of your listeners already have a connection to a higher power, whether it's their guides or their experience of God. It's different for everybody. But for me, it was hearing a voice of wisdom that was separate from my own mind, wiser than my own mind. And when I would ask questions about my life, it would always be able to give me an answer that would go way beyond my own understanding and would help me no longer feel as emotionally constricted with the issue I was having, help me see it from a wider perspective. And whenever I asked questions about the world or the universe at large, the answers that came back would blow my mind, but would also be confirmed. So I would channel something about, the universe or how energy works, and they would give me an answer that usually 3, 4, 5 weeks later, something would appear in my world, whether it was a book or an article that I happened to read, that would confirm what they had said from another source. So my guides have called themselves a consciousness library. People are always very interested in who they are, and my big thing is, I think that can be a distraction. Personally, I'm never too worried about us trying to pin down the identity of a certain being or energy, because once somebody or something isn't in the body anymore, it's less definable. But what I'm really, really hot on is whenever you're connecting with a guide or a higher power, or for that matter, a real-world human being teacher, it's not so much who they are or their credentials that we should be paying attention to. It's actually, how does their information, their energy, their teaching make us feel? Because we learn so much through feeling, and does it work? So they have said, some of us you would experience from the angelic realm. Some of us have been incarnate on the human plane before, and some of us are energy movers, meaning they have never been incarnate, but that their role is to help move and balance energy on the planet. But they also say we connect wider into source. So it's been a real interesting ride for sure. And I've learned a lot, and then after about 4 years, because my friends who were spiritual knew what I could do and I would help them out, one of them, who was a yoga teacher and had a newsletter and had people who came to her for her workshops, she said, you should be doing this for a job. And she sent me out to her list, and the rest was history. I started doing readings, and that was 15 years ago now.
Oh, my goodness, what a great story. And I love how you talk about your guides, because, everyone's got guides. And it's just learning how to connect with them and getting our own messages and making that relationship.
Yeah, and, I think some of the things I struggled with in the early years are common. I think because certainly for me, I was born in 76. So I think the younger generation now, people who are 25 and under, they have a very different idea and exposure to spirituality and consciousness than say, my generation or generations above me did. I think there was a lot less around, and there was kind of a separation. People, you either had stigma, so people who do that are weird, or well, if it's not God or it's not from your priest, it must be wrong. There were a lot of hard and fast rules, and there was a lot of fear that really, if you step back from it and look at the wider picture, was designed to disempower people and designed to essentially control people's access to spirit and say, well, no, if it's not coming through your priest, who is the judge and jury of your spiritual experience, then it's not true. And of course, we know that's such an illusion. It's not to put that priest down. It's just to say that if you are a soul in a human body, you are as connected to the universe as the next person. You just may not yet have heard it or been able to hear it. So I think one of the hardest things that people go through, and I went through when I first started channeling, is you think, am I making this up? Is this real? It's almost like you're waiting for someone else to christen or validate or verify your experience. But you can't go to the channeling examiner and say, did I get an A? Did I get a C? How am I with this channeling? No one else is ever going to be able to do that for you. And in my experience, the more you do it, and more importantly, the more you study it, because I think some people will say, oh, my channel told me this, so now I've got to go and do this. And I'm like, well, does that feel right to you? Because channeling is a guide. It's not a ruler. It's not in control of your life. It's an energetic viewpoint that has a higher and wider view, but that also isn't in the human body. And so whatever you channel for yourself, it's an addition to your own wisdom, and it's an addition to your own GPS for your life. But if we give our power away to that, which, again, goes back to that idea of us being asked to not own our own spiritual power, to ascribe it to the priest, I think people transplant that same power to their guides. I've seen many people tell me they're doing things because their guide said so, and clearly their life is a disaster. And I'm like, well, how's that working out for you? And they're suffering through yet another move of location because their guides told them. And I'm like, well, then hang on a second. You might want to, show me what you've been getting from your guides. I want to look at this because it clearly is making you suffer. And I don't think it's because your guides are wrong. I said it's because you've got to get in the driving seat and go, no, it isn't time yet. Because what I've learned about spirit messages is, in the world of spirit, everything is true, everything is possible, and there are multiple realities, dimensions, layers working all at once. In the world of the human, even those of us who are open to those dimensions, there's a limit to how many we've normally got running in our life at one time, not just because of the density of the planet, but because of the belief system of the whole collective. So therefore, it's a little bit like a recipe. If your guides say, oh, you need to add salt, it doesn't mean you pour, a whole jar of salt in. It means you then, as the human being, go, how much salt does this need? I think maybe just a little bit, because my friend Danny's eating this too, and I know he can't have too much salt. So I think it's using your guidance system to then co-create with yourself as a human being, a human mind, and somebody who's sensing your own way through life. I think that's where channeling can be really exciting, but I think if you're in the stage of giving your power away to it, it can be a little disorienting.
Well, I'm so glad that your book and you talk about this, because I agree with you. I think it's so important, because too often people do kind of give their power away when we as souls are here to have an experience on this planet, and we're responsible for our choices. And we shouldn't put that burden on our guides.
It's true, and ultimately the burden then lands on ourselves. And I don't think it's anyone's fault, because I did it too. I did it for a long time. Not so much with my own guides, but for example, I would attribute my own spiritual experiences to the teacher or the book. Whereas now I understand that any spiritual experience that we have that is at the hands of, or the facilitation of, another person or a book or a song. It's a co-creative experience. It's your 50% in it too. But I don't think we were trained that way. So I think much of our societal old programming, what we all grew up believing and being told about life, did set us up for a bit of a disadvantage. So, I always think that at the core of so many of our issues as people, there is a belief that we aren't enough. If you really drill down into all of our own psyches, or if you're working with someone, there's a belief that we aren't enough, or there's something slightly wrong with us, or there's something that we deserve to be isolated for. Or it's so interesting how that's in the psyche of so many people. So you start to go, oh, how did that get there? And one of the things that the guides talk about is that we have been asked to separate from ourselves so much that when people come to interact with a power that they see as greater from themselves, the only position they can take is to sit down underneath it and want to give their power away to it. So I'm really heartened by what I'm seeing in the world right now, and particularly the younger generation coming up, what they're being exposed to. I think of myself, and I don't know if this is true for you, Marianne, I was starving for shows like the Oprah Winfrey Show when I was 16 years old and it first came to England, and she was interviewing people, talking about their feelings and what they were going through. There just wasn't anything like that at the time. And I look at the younger people now growing up in a wealth of that, and I think it's going to be really healthy for people to, there's certainly other challenges for the younger generation now that perhaps we weren't in, but they're going to grow up with a greater sense of their own power and their own connection to things as a whole. Obviously, there are exceptions. There's the lightest, brightest 95-year-old you've ever met, and there's the densest, most in pain 15-year-old you've ever met. But in general, the new generation seem to be growing up with more access to an understanding of the power of being a human and the power of being a soul, which is really important.
I think we are living in a very exciting time, and I agree with you. I was born in the 60s, and I get it. There wasn't a whole lot available during that time, and people didn't express themselves the way that we're doing now, but what a great time we're living in. And it really seems that the millennial generation is really driven by purpose. And so when we look at that, having the ability to connect with your spirit group and have that deep connection with Source or Father or God, whatever you want to call that energy, is something that people are really diving into now than they ever have before, in my opinion.
So true. And I love that you use the word living with purpose and wanting to live with purpose, because I know for myself and for people that I work with that our biggest pain point is usually when we can't align with a sense of purpose. And I think sometimes purpose, that word can be a bit of a shiny object sometimes, because I think purpose can be as simple as, today my purpose is going to be, I'm going to clean the garage, and I'm really clear that that's the right thing to do today and that my energy is aligned with that. I think sometimes purpose is sold as this very, very big thing. But actually, as we know, when you're connected to what you're doing, whether it's helping your granddaughter that week or whether it's sitting down and writing poetry, the mind doesn't start thinking or second guessing in the way that it does when we feel disconnected from a sense of purpose. So I think purpose is such an important byproduct of being aligned with your soul.
Well, a little bit ago, you had touched on, when we talk about our spirit group and guides, just kind of identifying them. And I know when I first started my spiritual path, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there. A lot of times people may feel like they need a padded room when they start connecting with their spiritual guides, because they're hearing this information going,
yes,
wow, I must be on the brink of something here. I'm not quite sure exactly what. So how can people identify their guides and in a way that is empowering to them?
Well, what I always say is ask questions. So one thing that I I do in workshop rooms when I'm running a live workshop with people is, and I've done this on my online video courses too, is I get them to channel write. And, I say, right, now we're going to take 10 minutes and you're all going to channel for yourself. And obviously there are always people in the room that are already doing that. They're sensitives, they're healers, because that's, a big part of the people who align with my work. But then, of course, there are the other people who look absolutely horrified at me. And like I've just said, that we're going to, dye your hair purple. I know from doing this many, many times that 10 minutes later they're going to be shocked at the fact that they could do it. And I've never had anybody not be able to do it. And so what I say is just ask your soul to give you a message. Because for some people, I think the block can be the idea they've got to contact their guides or angels or, well, my friend channels this person from the 9th dimension, so I need to find my thing. And that can become as much of a block as anything. And so what I just encourage people to do is I say, ask for a voice of higher wisdom, because some people will feel it's their higher wisdom. Some people aren't as dimensional as others. So people who have an understanding of and a sensitivity or an awareness of other dimensions, for them, the idea of contacting a guide is quite normal, because they're like, well, of course, I feel there are beings everywhere. But for someone else, they might be conscious, they might be open, they might be aware of energy, but they might have a slightly different sensitivity. Perhaps they access divine intelligence more through their mind, and that's how they experience it. So I would say to start with literally sitting down with pen and paper or computer screen and say, what does my soul want to tell me today? And let it be a higher voice. But then once you've started that process of sitting and doing that and writing what comes through, it can then be that you ask questions and go, are you my guides? Where are you from? Will you ever incarnate on Earth? You can ask all the questions that you want, but it's also a practice for you to trust the answer that comes through, but also to know that things change. So for me, in the early years, there was a real definition around who they were. And I used to say this to people in my life. I said, if I die and I find out that, they were just a construct, that they were a construct to get me to connect with Source, I'm absolutely fine with that. I'm not going to be attached to me being right about who they are, but I can absolutely tell you that the evidence of what they have brought to me has changed my life for the better. And I can literally talk to you about, there was this time that they gave me that piece of information and it elevated that relationship beyond measure. So I think trust yourself when you want to ask those investigative questions, but for other people to not feel that if you aren't contacting what you feel as a guide, that you're not accessing a higher voice of wisdom.
Well, and I think that's such important information, because a lot of times people do think, gosh, I think my mind's making this up or what have you. And at some point you just have to trust. You have to trust what you get and continue to move with that. It's interesting. Your experience, you shared with us your story about how, you had this experience and someone just kind of put you on this path through their email list in regards to doing the work that you're doing today. I know there's a lot of people that are looking at making that transition where they can start to follow a more spiritual path and maybe do channeling and that type of work for themselves. What are some tips that you would give them or some advice you would give them if they're hesitant about starting that path?
Well, I would expect them to be hesitant about starting that path because, again, it just goes back to our belief systems, and I think you come up against the skepticism, the stigma, people who, especially because you're really talking about people who might want to do this for work, Marianne, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. I think a few different things. One of the things and this is an interesting area to start, but it's coming to me immediately, so we'll go with it. I think money and the spiritual path have a real knotted relationship. You know, I remember seeing in the early days how I did it at the very beginning, because it was the only way I was comfortable, was I did my readings on a donation basis. And I did the first 60 to 100 people on a donation basis. And the gift of that was twofold. Number one, I didn't feel uncomfortable about charging people, because I was giving people real permission to, you know, pay me $10 or $20 for my 90 minutes of focusing on their life and typing out answers to their questions, which was how it began for me. And I would, you know, give them 2,000 words, normally about a 2,000 word typed document in response to 3 questions they would email me. That was back in the early days. And one of the things I noticed when I started to recognize the value of what I was doing, and I was getting a bit exhausted because I couldn't keep up with demand, I started to raise my minimum price. And every time I did that, boy, did I go through it in my own body and my own psyche. And yet it was interesting. There were people who would donate quite high amounts to me as well, which would always blow my mind. So what I noticed when I started to post things online, which was about 2006, and I started to notice other contemporaries out there doing the same, you would see, I swear it was the same troll. It's almost like the same troll who had like 9 different YouTube accounts. They would post things like, "You're going to hell in a handbasket. You shouldn't be charging for spiritual information if you were a real healer." And at first I was a little kind of traumatized by the aggression in those kinds of comments. And now I just roll my eyes, because I'm like, God, that person really, that they're spending all their time, you know, being a witch hunter, because that's what I say, that they're like the modern day witch hunter. And they have made a decision that money is evil, and that therefore to charge, you know. And I thought, the thing that always blows my mind is, you know, Jesus didn't work for free. You know, he was getting food donations or shelter, and back in the day, he didn't need a bank account, because it was a very different, giving him certain things to help keep him alive. And the one thing that I love about the internet is you can basically give people work for free. But as we know, and as you know, Marianne, doing your show, it takes time, it takes energy. There are production values that you usually are employing people to wrap around the work that you're doing. So doing the work in the wider world does require a certain amount of money. And so one of the best things you can do for your own hesitation around, oh, God, well, I can't charge for this because, you know, I've got a belief that I shouldn't. Remember, the money isn't going to be yours. Money will come through you, and you will use money for your mission. You will also use money to support your life, and perhaps to, you know, buy yourself a massage once a month, or whatever it's going to be, to give back to your energy field that you are using for the benefit of other people's energy field. But that you will also, because, you know, healers have a benevolent understanding of life, you will, any money that you generate that's surplus to your needs, you will pour back into your mission. So, number one, being willing to allow money in, but I think most importantly, the joy of doing the work, finding something at the beginning that connects with people. Because I've met some people who go about it the wrong way. They're like, well, I want to be a healer and I'm worth $100 an hour. And I'm like, well, have you proved that yet? Have people felt your value? Have you got clients? I do think, as with anything, people need to feel the value of something, and then they are willing to invest in the value. And I see too many people setting themselves up for a failure because they've decided they want to be $200 a session, and they've not done anything yet. They've not. So what I would say is, I mean, there's so much I could say about this topic, Marianne. I'm really passionate about talking about how you kind of, because there's a creativity to building, if you like, a structure around this work. But I think the first things to do is to recognize it's going to process you. You know, your personal healing and growth journey is going to be going on behind the scenes, because as people receive your work, as you experience giving your work, as you have to make decisions around, well, what am I doing next? And what am I offering? And is there something I'm offering for free? And then is there a service that people can employ me for if they like my free offering? All of that stuff is going to churn you, grow you, expand your mind, and definitely push you through some emotions. So I would say embrace that and don't be hard on yourself. It's a journey.
You know, I have to agree with you, and it's interesting in my journeys when someone is, when you get that pushback, especially to people who are doing this type of work, you do often hear, well, you know, it's a God-given gift, and so you should give it away for free. And my response to that has always been, well, then next time you go to work, tell your boss you don't need the check, because you obviously have God-given gifts that is promoting the work that you're doing, whatever capacity that may be. So how people earn a living one way or another, it doesn't diminish their level of giftedness, you know, in any way. So I always kind of chuckle a little bit when someone says that, because it's like, well, you know, maybe you're really good at the work you do, and God gave you that gift. So give it away for free then, you know, but we still have to all pay our rents and mortgages and what have you, you know?
I love that. And I do think I love the power of you having an answer for that person, because I think that's often where people feel a bit defenseless. They encounter these kinds of comments for the first time and they're like, I don't know what to say to that. But what you just said is so perfectly true. And also, you know, once you're through being triggered by that kind of stuff, you do just have compassion for those people, because what always blows my mind is I'm like, who has the time to sit on the internet and send out negativity to other people? Like, it blows my mind. I'm like, wow, what state of mind and state of heart must you be in to want to fire bullets at other people via social media or comments? I mean, and, you know, that's what I always come back to. I'm like, you know, God loves that person, because there's clearly some unhappiness at work that they're choosing to play out their conflict using me or you or someone else as a focus point for that, rather than investigating, why does this trigger me?
Lee, I couldn't agree with you more. On that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Lee Harris in regards to his new book, Energy Speaks. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed, and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Lee Harris in regards to his new book, Energy Speaks: Messages from Spirit on Living, Loving, and Awakening. Now, Lee, before we went for break, we were talking about spirit guides, and so I've got a question for you. Do you believe that everyone has a spirit guide, and are they able to communicate with them on the other side?
Yes and no. Put it this way, I don't appear to be programmed to be like a master chef in this lifetime. That hasn't flowed through me yet. But there are other people who were naturally gifted in that way. Now, do I believe that if I was taken out of my work right now and sent to chef school for 3 months, that I could do it? Yeah, absolutely. In much the same way that if someone else was taken away from their gift of being a chef and they were, put through a metaphysical school for 3 months, they would come out with more of a contact for that. So yes and no, in that I do believe that we're all able to do this. And no, I really trust the tapestry of our unique gifts. I'm really grateful that someone who chose to be a dentist in this lifetime is there for me when I need to go to the dentist, just as I play out my role for the people who need or benefit from what I do. So we are a tapestry, and I think it's great that we're all unique and different. But I do believe everyone has the ability. I just don't believe that everybody will choose to explore or tap into it.
Mm-hmm. Move that direction. Well, Halo, so let's talk about your spirit guides, because I know you have a collective, and I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about them.
Well, when I first met them, I said, do you have a name? And, because they'd already explained that the way they described themselves, they said, we're a collective of 88 entities that then extend wider into source. So the way I view that is, imagine 88 people standing in front of you, and they're all a bit psychic, and they're all a bit tapped into consciousness. So it's almost like I feel like, the guides that I channel are channeling the universe. So they're like a central point that I have contact to. It's almost like a relay race. A bridge of information. When I asked, do you have a name? They said, well, we don't have names. It doesn't really work like that for us. They said, but we know that human beings need names. So I'm the lead spokesperson for the group, and you can call me Zachary. And a few years later, I started to explore more of the different energies and entities in the collective. It had never really occurred to me to do that until I met a few friends and a partner at the time who was really interested in that kind of stuff. I mean, I was always the least interested in their origin, and I would find people who were fascinated by that side of things. To me, it was much more interesting what they were saying. When I did dig in a bit, I met a couple of the others. They gave me the names Zayadora and Zachariah, and they said, you would see us as more feminine energy. If Zachary is more masculine energy, even though they said we are all far more fluid than most humans are wired to be, but still you would see us as the feminine. Then I met a couple of the angels who I actually channeled them through my body, and it was really fascinating. They did not like being on Earth because at the time I was opening my eyes with channeling. And I remember what they were saying, because we recorded it. It was a personal, private recording, really, when I was just exploring one weekend, and my then partner was holding space for it. I remember them saying, it's so dark down here. it's so dark, it's so dense. And those were the angelics. And they didn't want to be in my body looking at it. They wanted to get out. And I thought that's very interesting, because the people I've met who have angelic sensitivity, they're usually the people who have to learn how to not be too sensitive for this world. Their sensitivity is a gift, but it can also be a curse until they really understand and own quite how light their soul is, and how, therefore, when they interact with people or places or things that are particularly dense or conflict-based, they can lose energy, because their job is to hold a certain level of angelic energy in their field as a human. And, you know, I'm sure everyone listening has met those people where you're like, wow, God, they're like an angel. Just something about them. And the ones who are really good at being angelic on the earth have learned how to look after themselves, have figured out, often through really tough times or tough experiences or ill-chosen relationships, how to look after and nurture their sensitivity. So yeah, I think over that weekend I met about 12 different beings. But I did channel Zayadora and Zafariah for several years publicly. And at the time that was interesting. I was a little triggered about how people would react at the time. You know, the idea of being in a male body this time, even though I've always identified with feminine energy first, actually, more than male energy as a kid. But it was interesting that they said there was a reason that sometimes the channels would come through a more masculine energy like Zachary's, feminine energy like Zayadora's, and then that Zafariah you could see as right in the middle. She identified as feminine, but she had a lot of masculine energy and personality, actually. And then a few years back, they just said, okay, that phase is over. Now we're just going to become a collective again. So I call them the Z's, because Z was the first letter of the names I was given. So now I just refer to them as the Z's. But I can still tell when I'm channeling them if it's a little more Zachary in the lead or a little more Zayadora. It's usually to do with the softness of the voice. Zayadora will come through as a much softer, much more heartfelt voice, and Zachary will come through not without heart energy, but a little bit more, I don't know, there's a different strength when it's Zachary.
Well, and with working with them over the time that you have, it should be really easy to identify which one is, you know, channeling at that time. You probably have a couple of them channeling at the same time.
Yeah, and they really are a collective, much in the same way that, you know, you and I are a collective. You know, Marianne, it's like how many different aspects of personality do we have? And at any one time, you know, your more vulnerable side is in charge today, or your strong side is in charge today, or your excited creative side is in charge. It doesn't mean that all the other aspects have completely disappeared. It just means that a certain one is driving the car a bit more than one of the others that day.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think for people, it really gives them some insight into what the possibilities are when they connect with their guide teams, and, you know, what they can kind of expect. I mean, not everyone will choose to do this type of channeling, but, you know, the possibilities are endless.
They really are. Yeah, they really are. And it's really unique. I think that's the important thing. I would have some people say, oh, well, I'm channeling and it's not like you. And I'm like, well, thank God, because, you know, the world doesn't need a clone of any of us. Or I would I'd hear people say, oh, well, I'm not channeling quite like Esther Hicks, who I think is just, you know, a masterful channeler. I just think she's got such a strong vibration as a channeler. And I really appreciate the space that she has held for channeling for so long. But I do think it's so important that people find their own connection and trust that it will be uniquely them. I've just released an audio course called How to Channel and Why. And it's a 2-hour audio recording where I walk people through doing it, why it's important, what they might come up against when they do it. And the last 25 minutes was actually the Z's talking about channeling, and that section is called A Channeled Perspective on Channeling. And one of the things they explain is they say it's always somewhat influenced by your personality and your personal gifts. So, for example, and I've seen this to be true, having met lots of channelers over the years at live events, the very scientific channel usually comes through somebody who has some level of knowledge of science. It's not because the channel is reliant on their personal knowledge of science, because the channel will normally go beyond. But there has to be an alignment in the frequency of channeler and channel, the channeled beings. So that's something that I think people sometimes overlook. They get into this idea of thinking, oh, well, it must be absolutely nothing like me if it's real. But actually, we're all connected to each other. So in much the same way that you might say, well, my friend and I are so different. Well, yes and no. You are, but there's something that you and your friend are connecting on. There's an alignment. And it's the same with your own guides. There should be some level of alignment, some level of recognition. And I found that very reassuring, because I've seen that to be true. And I think sometimes people make it harder than it needs to be, because they think it should be more different, or it should feel more alien to them. Channeling for me feels like home. They feel like family. They feel like home. So I was never, ever scared of them or the experience of channeling, but I definitely had a lot of human fear about what people might think of me, especially when I became a public channeler. Did I really want to go through, all the kind of crap that can come with it, excuse my language, and people meet you at a party and they're having a lovely conversation with you. You're just talking about a movie. You're having a great time. All of a sudden they ask what you do. If you're bold enough to use the word channeler, you see them change. You see them pull back and you go, oh, interesting. We just met a disconnect. So, yeah, for me, I didn't know if I wanted to go through that stuff.
Or they do the opposite, where they ask for on-the-spot reading.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is where we use your line, Marianne, about would if your boss turned up now and wanted you to work, would you work for your boss at this party?
You probably know what my answer would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, the business is closed. But
yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting because developing those kind of boundaries and that level of just self-confidence, I think, is very helpful for light workers as they begin their path. And and since we're kind of touching on light workers, I thought you had a beautiful description in your book about that, and I think that word gets kind of thrown around a lot. And I'd love for you to share with us what a light worker is, so that everyone has a really good understanding.
Well, for me, a light worker, there are two ways I look at it. A light worker to me is the wonderful woman who drew my blood, a few weeks ago, who was so kind and so warm. And as she was drawing my blood and we were chatting, I was thinking, wow, what an angel this woman is, in this place of probably some fear, some trepidation. And I thought, wow, she's a light worker. Now, we had a chat about some things, so she clearly is not someone of a spiritual mindset. She's not someone with an overtly spiritual focus. And I know that because we talked a little bit. But her energy field and what she's doing in that place that I went to, she basically is to me an evidential light worker. Now, the other kind of light worker is probably what many of your audience will identify with being people who feel purposeful about bringing more consciousness and light and love to the world. So this can be the mother or father who, have a really busy life between their work and their kids, but because they've always studied consciousness and studied spirituality, they're really consciously working to educate their kids in more conscious ways. Or they're the person that their friends turn to for advice. You're kind of like the unofficial healer to people in your family. You're the one that people come to with really tough emotional stuff that they don't want to talk to anybody else about. So there's that kind of light worker that I think is the more dominant kind that we identify with, people who know that they're light workers or they identify with being a light worker. And I always say, sometimes people get confused, and I say, well, it doesn't mean that you're not human going through the lessons that we're all going through or the growth that we're all going through, but it does mean that at least half of your focus is on a desire to help the environments, the people, the world that you are interacting with be a little better, be a little raised, be a slightly higher vibration. So a lot of healers and a lot of people who want to help society, whether it's through the science they're creating to improve our lives, or whether it's the consciousness teaching or offering or space that they're creating, they're light workers.
Well, I think that's so important to hear that, because I think sometimes people can just attribute it to maybe somebody with a tambourine, wearing tie-dye and kind of off their rocker, as opposed to people who are really looking to make a positive impact in the world.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most powerful people I've ever met are doing extraordinary things in the world itself. I think this, again, it goes back to that notion of separation. Well, to be a spiritual person, you have to be with your tambourine and your tie-dye in Tibet, going around and helping people in the orphanage. Well, yeah, that's one example of it, but there are so many people in our society, maybe living on our street that we've never met, who are really wanting to live and operate through kindness and generosity and service as much as possible. And there comes a point when service becomes such a joy. And I think we all have our individual paths. So, for example, if you're a single father struggling to raise your 2 kids and keep your job down, and everything's a bit tight for you around resources or energy, no, you shouldn't probably. That's not the time in your life to go and volunteer at the local crisis center as well if you're already overstretched. And the light worker mind, they'll sometimes think they're not doing enough. But I think it's relative. You have to recognize what your challenges are in life, try and keep your balance in the middle of them, and trust that as your life changes and as you do look after yourself, you will run more energy through yourself to serve the people around you, and then service can keep growing. So, one of the things I always say to people who are feeling funny about abundance, I'm like, don't keep those resources away from yourself if they're meant to come to you, because just imagine what you're going to do with them. You're going to be benevolent with those resources just as you are benevolent with your energy, just as you are benevolent with the way you help people. So if money comes to you and it's more than you need, you're going to share it round and use it for good. So don't stop it coming to yourself because of some kind of judgment. Think of it as it can come through you so that you can be a vessel to use it. And it's funny because there are 3 chapters in the book that really deal with abundance. And there's one called Abundance, there's one called Loving Money, which was, I thought, a very interesting title because, of course, the idea of loving money can trigger all kinds of emotions in us, and I think that's why that title came through. But then my favorite's The Art of Receiving. And in The Art of Receiving, they really kind of break down how we can be so resistant to receiving. It's easier for most people, especially light workers, to give. So they really drill into how to open up to receive more and trust that things can flow through you. And the example that, that comes up there is, so many of us would be willing for a friend to buy us a coffee and a cake. Oh, I'll get coffee and cake this time. And you go, oh, thanks, okay. But if your friend said, hey, can I take you to Paris for the weekend? I'll pay for everything. I'll pay for the flights. I'll pay for the 5-star hotel. I'll pay for all of our meals. Very few people would say to that friend, oh, great, thanks. Well, hang on. Our own limits of receiving would start to negotiate, wouldn't trust, would refuse. And I had it just recently with a friend when myself and my husband bought dinner for them. I heard her say, because she was a little uncomfortable that we were doing that, she so didn't need to, we'll get it next time. And I thought, God, how many times did I used to do that? You know, if someone gave me something, I would accept it on the condition that I was going to give it to them back in some way. And so, I totally got why she was doing it. I didn't say anything to her, but I really saw myself in the past. And I thought, gosh, we all do that. It's so interesting. So, yeah.
There is something to be learned from being able to not block things that show up in life, really being open and accepting the gifts that show up, because, there are many times that we do go and do things for other people, and it can look whatever way it is, but, not being the person that's going, oh, well, I'll do it this time, I'll get you next time, It's interesting how we do that.
Yeah, we do, and it's it's interesting when you become aware of that stuff. I catch myself doing things like that all the time. It's like, oh wow, that vibration does not feel resonant anymore. So I think that's the gift of awareness. It doesn't mean you have to be quote unquote perfect. Instead, the gift of awareness is you start to notice old modes of behavior or sayings that come out of our mouth, and we go, oh, I can let that go now. I can upgrade that. Maybe that was true for the last decade, but actually I no longer want to live by the power of that sentence that I just affirmed out loud.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. Well, I think I have time for one more question. Of course, I've got a ton of questions here. We'll never get through them all. I mean, everyone will, of course, want to pick up their own copy of Energy Speaks. But, you talk about that we're going through this shift in consciousness that's happening now on this planet. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that for us.
Well, I think one of the most concrete ways we can look at it is you and I, very early on in our conversation today, we talked about the younger generation. And, you said you grew up in the 60s, I grew up in the 70s, and we did not see in our childhoods the kind of level of emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, spiritual resources, environmental focus that we're seeing now, and that the internet has definitely made available to us all. It's a way that more information than ever and access to resources is available to people. So for me, that's evidence of the shift in consciousness. If you think of consciousness as a way of thinking or feeling or behaving, we as a society have a very different experience now than we did 20 or 30 years ago. Now, of course, the tricky side of this time is the intensity of it. So the energetic intensity and the speed of change that so many of us are going through is really, really high and really strong and faster than ever before. And equally, we're looking at systems from our old world, or certainly from the last 50, 60 years, that are no longer working, exposing themselves to be not beneficial, exposing themselves to have greater shadows than light. And that can really play with people's personal sense of identity. One of the things that we're seeing now is more feeling in people. And I remember many years ago, the Aziz saying, you're going to see people becoming more emotional. This was like a decade ago. And I remember at the time interpreting that as a great thing. I was like, wow, what a great, how lovely. Everyone's going to be hugging. And it was like, no, first of all, for people who aren't conscious of what they're going through, it can be a little alarming. And I think a lot of people are going through quite intense emotions. They're shedding parts of the identity that they had. So, for example, if you have a very high dose of fear in your body, you're going to align with more limited fear-based experiences. If you shed the fear, you start to move into higher vibrational realities. But that can be quite scary as a process if you don't understand that that's what's going on. So that to me is what these times are about, these shifting times in consciousness. And I think that's why more and more light workers are being told, you're needed and now is your time. And don't underestimate the power of what you do for somebody who perhaps doesn't know why things are imploding in their life, but even just you being able to reassure them that it's all going to be okay, that's really powerful because you're giving people hope and you're helping them move through a feeling that's very difficult to feel and to process, and you're telling them there's a light at the other side of the tunnel. So that's why I think this time is very purposeful for light workers too. Whether you work as a healer or whether you're what I like to call a covert healer, someone in your community who is the healer to people, even though you don't have that name, this is a very purposeful time because people are needing help as we go through this shift. It's a little bit like coming down the birth canal. So that's one of the reasons I do my free monthly videos, the energy updates, to try and help people. They're normally 15 minutes long. They're on YouTube every month or my website. And I talk about the themes that might be impacting people and give a few tools to deal with them every month.
Well, I know you've got not just a lot of great resources on your website, but you also have all these events coming up. And I'd love for you to share your website so people know where they can go to learn more about this.
Yeah, so my website is leeharrisenergy.com. And, I have events coming up in June in Denver and in London, and then a 7-day retreat in Costa Rica in October. And I have online courses and live events that happen online too, so that if you can't make it to the in-person, there's always a way to tune in and connect with the work I do.
Well, that's fabulous. Now, do you do personal sessions with people? I know you're really busy, so I would be surprised if you did that.
I just finished. I'm literally I have about 4 left. It was something I had less and less time to do, and I had a long wait list, and I clearly got the message that I needed to do more of the larger scale work now. So I've just finished doing that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, great. So people know where to go. And, of course, they want to pick up your brand new book, Energy Speaks, which I know is available everywhere books are sold. So that's very exciting. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, such a journey. Well, Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me on. And it was really lovely to have the conversation with you and your listeners. Thanks, Marianne.
Well, it's been such an honor, Lee, to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, Energy Speaks, Messages from Spirit on Living, Loving, and Awakening. You can pick up a copy of Energy Speaks at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Again, if you'd like to connect with Lee, you can at his website, leeharrisenergy.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.